Hi everyone, it's Alex from Risk Academy, and today I wanted to talk about a few things why I feel risk management in non-financial companies is just not as effective as it could be. If you've seen some of my previous videos, you know I believe risk management is a very powerful decision-making tool. But the reality is it's just not as effective as the potential of that tool is. It's not used effectively, it's not used correctly, or it doesn't deliver the value that it possibly can. And there are a few reasons, and in this video I want to talk about one reason specifically, or one misconception. We and some of us in the profession, especially in the consulting world, we tend to believe that thinking about risks is natural. So when you have a conversation with people about risks, when you try to identify risks, when you try to discuss risks associated with a particular decision or project or a strategy or an objective, there is that assumption that you would have a decent dialogue, that the other side of the conversation will understand what you want, and you will work in collaboration to come up with first analysis to understand the nature of that particular risk and how it affects the objective or the decision, and then come up with the mitigation strategy or adjust the business process or the decision to take that risk into account. Now, unfortunately, or the reality is that that's actually not true. Thinking about risks is not natural to human beings. Risk analysis is not natural. Understanding probabilities is not natural for human beings. And I've done, sorry, I'm in a wonderful field, but there are a lot of flies. Now, I've done a few videos on that topic already, and I continue to encourage every single risk professional, if you are serious about your job, if you want to understand why people say the things they say, why people ignore the checklists or the interviews or the workshops that you are conducting, or why there is a huge disconnect between what people tell you and what you then later find out is the reality. All of these things are actually quite easily explained by science. On how our brains work, on how people perceive uncertainty and risk. So I encourage every single risk professional to really spend some time investigating things that scientists called neuroeconomics. This is the science on how our brain works when we make decisions. And I mean, there are a lot of quite scary findings. One of the findings is, for example, that our brain makes up its mind, makes a decision, sends a chemical signal 8 seconds before we as a human being feel that we've made that decision. So scientists, by monitoring our brain activity, can predict 8 seconds in advance, at least 8 seconds in advance, predict how we will action, what sort of decision we will take on a particular situation. So you know, there are a lot of scary findings, and risk managers really need to be aware of that. So neuroeconomics, there's a field of study that is called risk perception. I mean, there's word risk in the name. It's really embarrassing for the risk professionals not to know that. And there are over 200 cognitive biases. Not all of them are relevant to risk discussion, but there are few that impact and really lead or influence how people discuss and think about risks. You by knowing those cognitive biases, you can actually expect certain answers, certain behaviors in group settings and individual discussions. So all of these things are really important for the risk managers to understand. You need to understand the science and the chemistry behind how people think and behave in situations of uncertainty. For example, you need to understand why scare of losing is so much greater than pleasure of winning, and how that drives motivation and how that drives risky behavior. You need to understand the most basic things, that it is in fact chemistry that weeks before the end of the period, before the end of the quarter, or before the end of the year, when the KPIs are calculated, that's when people start making the most riskiest decisions, because that's human nature. That's not because they're bad people. That's what every single human being does, because they're humans. So there are a lot of interesting research findings. I do encourage all the risk managers to look into neuroeconomics, risk perception, cognitive biases. I mean, there's a reason why in 2002 two scientists, Vernon Smith and Daniel Kahneman, won a Nobel Prize for that, and there was another Nobel Prize in economics in 2017, this year. So there's really no excuse. You need to know the background, and I mean, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but if you meet a person who talks about risk culture and doesn't support his observations, his claims or statements by actual science, because risk culture is actually very scientific, it's almost chemistry-like. There is a lot of explanations on why people do things, and the explanation that they do things because they're bad people is actually only applicable in like less than 1%. 99% of the times people do things because they're human. And risk managers, I think risk managers have been not as successful as they could have been. One of the reasons being is that they completely disregard human nature. They completely disregard science, and they just live in this bubble believing that you can just rock up and talk to people about risks and expect honest, truthful answers. That will never happen. And not because people have something to hide, but because our brains are built in a particular way. So anyway, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. What other scientific, not wishful thinking, nice slogans that risk is everybody's responsibility? That is rubbish, by the way. Of course it is, but that's not how humans are built. So you need to actually be very proactive, and you need to make it happen. It just doesn't. It will not happen by itself. So I'm interested in hearing what other scientific theories you have come across that you found useful in risk work. Do write underneath this video. For me, for now, thank you and goodbye.